The first time he touched a piano, he was 7 years old. His fingers were small, his hands were dirty, and he had no business being in that room. But something about those black and white keys called to him in a way he could not explain. It was like finding a door he never knew existed, and behind that door was a whole new world waiting just for him. His name was, and he lived in a part of the city most people try to forget. The streets were cracked, the buildings were old, and dreams were something rich kids talked about. His father had left before he was born. His mother raised him alone, working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. They lived in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building where the elevator never worked, and the hallway always smelled like cigarette smoke. His mother was a janitor. She cleaned offices during the day and worked at a music academy at night. The academy was called Westbrook, and it was one of the most famous music schools in the state. Kids from wealthy families went there to learn violin, cello, and piano from teachers who had performed all over the world. The tuition for one semester cost more than his mother made in a whole year. Every night, his mother would take the bus across town to clean the floors, wipe down the pianos, and empty the trash cans of students who would never even notice she existed. She worked from 8 in the evening until 2 in the morning, 6 days a week. By the time she came home, her back ached and her hands were raw from the cleaning chemicals. Was too young to stay home alone, so she had no choice but to bring him along. At first, he would sit in the supply closet with a flashlight and some old comic books, waiting for her to finish. The hours felt endless. He could hear strange sounds coming from down the hallway, scales being played, melodies rising and falling, notes that seemed to dance in the air. One night, curiosity got the better of him. While his mother was cleaning the bathrooms on the 2nd floor, he wandered down the empty corridor and pushed open a heavy wooden door. The room behind it took his breath away. It was a practice room, small but beautiful. The walls were covered in dark wood panels. A tall window let in the glow of the streetlights outside. And in the center of the room sat a grand piano, black and shiny, like something out of a movie. He had never seen anything so elegant in his life. He walked toward it slowly, almost afraid to breathe. He ran his fingers along the smooth surface of the piano. It felt cool and perfect. Then he sat down on the bench and looked at the keys. He pressed one, just one, and a single note rang out into the silence. The sound filled the room. It filled something inside him too. That night changed everything. From then on, every time his mother brought him to the academy, he would sneak into that same practice room after she started her rounds. He only had a few hours each night, and he had to be careful not to play too loud. But those hours became the most important part of his life. He did not have a teacher, he did not have lessons, he did not even have a piano at home. What he had was an old smartphone with a cracked screen that his mother had bought for $20 at a pawn shop. And on that phone he discovered something incredible. Video tutorials. Thousands of them. People teaching piano for free, step by step, note by note. He would watch the videos during the day, memorizing the finger positions and the movements. Then at night, he would practice what he learned on the grand piano at Westbrook. It was slow at first. His fingers stumbled. His timing was off. Some nights he wanted to give up because it felt impossible. But he did not give up, not once. There was something inside him that refused to quit. Maybe it was because he had so little in his life that he held onto this one thing with everything he had. Maybe it was because the music made him feel like he was somebody, even when the world treated him like nobody. Whatever the reason, he kept going. Night after night, month after month, year after year. By the time he was 10, he could play simple songs from memory. By 12, he was working through pieces that most beginners would not attempt until years of formal training. By 15, he was teaching himself Chopin and composers whose names he had never heard before he started this journey. His mother knew about the practice sessions, of course. She had found out one night when she finished early and went looking for him. She had stood in the doorway of the practice room, watching her son play with tears running down her face. She never told him to stop. How could she? This was the first time she had ever seen him truly happy. But she made him promise to keep it a secret. If anyone at the academy found out that the janitor's son was using the pianos, they would both lose everything. She could lose her job, and he could lose the only place where his dream was allowed to exist. So he learned to be invisible. He never played when anyone else was around. He always wiped down the piano keys before he left so no one would know someone had been there. He never told a single person at school about his secret life. At Lincoln High School, he was just another quiet kid. He wore clothes from thrift stores. He ate free lunch in the cafeteria. He sat in the back of classrooms and kept his head down. Most of his classmates did not even know his name. Teachers barely noticed him. He was the kind of student who blended into the background, easy to overlook, easy to forget. Nobody knew that every night, while they were sleeping or scrolling on their phones, he was sitting at a grand piano in an empty practice room, teaching himself to play music that most people only dreamed of mastering. Nobody knew about the calluses on his fingers or the hours of practice or the videos he watched over and over until his eyes burned. He had two lives. One was ordinary, forgettable, and small. The other was extraordinary, hidden, and completely his own. 10 years passed this way. 10 years of secrets. 10 years of silent dedication. 10 years of becoming something nobody expected. And then came senior year. His school announced a talent show. The prize was a $5,000 scholarship, enough money to help with college, enough money to change his future. Students could sign up to perform anything they wanted, singing, dancing, comedy, whatever. When he saw the sign-up sheet posted on the bulletin board outside the main office, something stirred inside him. He stood there for a long time just staring at the paper. Other students walked past, laughing and talking, not paying attention to the quiet boy standing alone. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. Every part of him wanted to walk away and keep his secret safe, the way he had for the past 10 years. But another part of him, a part he had kept locked away for so long, wanted something more. It wanted to be seen. It wanted to be heard. It wanted the world to know what he had become. Before he could talk himself out of it, he grabbed a pen and wrote his name on the list. Under the section that asked for the type of performance, he wrote one word: piano. He did not know it yet, but that single word was about to change everything. The moment he wrote his name on that sign-up sheet, he felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. It was like jumping off a cliff without knowing how deep the water was below. For 10 years, he had kept his secret locked away. Now, with a few strokes of a pen, he had put himself out there for everyone to see. He walked away from the bulletin board quickly, hoping no one had noticed. His heart was still racing when he got to his next class. He slid into his seat at the back of the room and tried to act normal, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. What had he just done? Was this a terrible mistake? For the next 2 days, he went back and forth in his head. One minute he wanted to find the sign-up sheet and cross his name off. The next minute he reminded himself why he had signed up in the first place. That scholarship money could change his life. It could help his mother. It could prove that all those years of secret practice meant something. He decided to leave his name on the list. Then came Thursday afternoon. He was sitting in his usual spot in the back of the music appreciation class when the door swung open and Mr. walked in. Mr. was the head of the music department at Lincoln High. He had been teaching there for over 20 years and had a reputation that everyone in the school knew about. Mr. was talented. There was no denying that. He had studied at a famous conservatory when he was young and had even performed in concert halls across the country. But somewhere along the way, he had become bitter. Maybe it was because his own dreams of becoming a famous pianist never came true. Maybe it was because he was stuck teaching teenagers who did not care about classical music. Whatever the reason, Mr. had turned into the kind of teacher who looked down on anyone he considered beneath him. He wore expensive suits to school every day. He spoke in a voice that made everything sound like a lecture, and he had a habit of making students feel small, especially the ones who did not come from wealthy families or did not have formal training. On that Thursday, Mr. walked into the classroom holding a piece of paper. He had a smirk on his face, the kind of smirk that meant he was about to enjoy himself at someone else's expense. He stood at the front of the room and cleared his throat loudly. The students stopped talking and looked up. "I have here," Mr. began, waving the paper in the air, "the sign-up list for next week's talent show. I have to say, I was quite surprised by some of the names I saw." A few students shifted in their seats, curious about where this was going. Mr.'s eyes scanned the room slowly, like a hawk looking for prey. Then his gaze landed on the back corner, on the quiet boy in the second-hand shirt who never raised his hand and never spoke up. "You," Mr. said, pointing directly at him, "stand up." His stomach dropped. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward him. He felt his face grow hot as he slowly rose from his seat. "You signed up for the talent show," Mr. said. It was not a question. It was an accusation. He nodded, unable to find his voice. "And you wrote that you would be playing piano." Mr. let out a short laugh, as if he had just heard the funniest joke of his life. "Piano, is that correct?" "Yes, sir," he managed to say. Mr. folded his arms across his chest and shook his head slowly. "Tell me something. Have you ever had a piano lesson in your life? Even one?" The room was dead silent. He could feel everyone staring at him, waiting for his answer. "No, sir," he said quietly. "No lessons," Mr. repeated, louder this time so the whole class could hear. "No formal training, and yet you think you can perform piano at a school talent show, in front of hundreds of people." A few students started to snicker. Someone in the front row whispered something to the person next to them, and they both laughed. Mr. was enjoying this. He walked closer, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor. "Let me tell you something," the teacher said. "Piano is not a hobby you pick up in your spare time. It is not something you learn from watching videos on your phone. It takes years of disciplined study under the guidance of a trained professional. It takes natural talent and refined technique. It takes everything that you clearly do not have." The words hit like punches. Each one landed harder than the last. He stood there, frozen, unable to move or speak. The laughter in the room grew louder. "Sit down," Mr. said with a wave of his hand, as if he were shooing away a fly. "And do yourself a favor. Take your name off that list before you embarrass yourself in front of the whole school." He sank back into his chair, his face burning with shame. The rest of the class felt like it lasted forever. He did not hear a single word the teacher said. All he could hear was the laughter echoing in his ears. All he could feel was the weight of 100 eyes judging him, dismissing him, writing him off as a joke. When the bell finally rang, he grabbed his bag and rushed out of the room. He walked through the hallway with his head down, trying to disappear. But the news had already spread. Word traveled fast in high school, and by the end of the day, it seemed like everyone knew about the quiet kid who thought he could play piano. People pointed at him in the halls. They whispered behind his back. A group of students from the music club walked past him and laughed out loud without even trying to hide it. "Hey, piano man," one of them called out, "maybe stick to air guitar." He kept walking. He did not respond. He just kept his eyes on the floor and kept moving forward. That night he sat alone in his room and stared at the wall. The shame from that afternoon still clung to him like a wet blanket. Mistress' words played over and over in his mind. "No formal training. Clearly do not have what it takes. Embarrass yourself." Maybe the teacher was right. Maybe he had been foolish to think he could compete against students who had real lessons and real teachers and real talent. Maybe he should just take his name off the list and go back to being invisible. He pulled out his phone and opened the videos he had been watching for years. The tutorials, the performances, the masters playing pieces that seemed impossible. He had spent 10 years learning from these videos, 10 years practicing alone in the dark, 10 years believing that hard work could make up for everything he did not have. Was all of that worth nothing? He thought about his mother. He thought about her hands, rough from years of cleaning. He thought about the nights she let him sneak into those practice rooms, the way she watched him play with tears in her eyes, the way she believed in him even when no one else did. He thought about the piano at Westbrook Academy, the way the keys felt under his fingers, the way the music filled the empty room, the way it made him feel like he was more than just a poor kid from a forgotten neighborhood. That feeling was real, that music was real, and no teacher, no matter how many fancy degrees he had, could take that away. He made a decision right there in his dark little room. He was not going to take his name off the list. He was going to walk onto that stage and show them all what 10 years of love and sacrifice and silent dedication looked like. He was going to play like his life depended on it, because in many ways it did. Mr. wanted to humiliate him. Fine, let him try. But he had no idea what was coming. The week leading up to the talent show was the longest of his life. Every day felt like walking through a storm. The whispers followed him everywhere. The looks, the laughter, people he had never even spoken to suddenly knew his name, but only as a punchline. He kept his head down and pushed through it. Every night, he went to Westbrook Academy with his mother and practiced until his fingers ached. He played the same piece over and over again, polishing every note, perfecting every transition. He had chosen one of the most difficult piano compositions ever written. It was a piece that concert pianists spent years mastering, a piece that Mr. himself probably could not play. It was a risk, a huge risk. If he made even one mistake, it would prove everyone right. But if he played it perfectly, no one would ever doubt him again. The night of the talent show arrived faster than he expected. The auditorium was packed. Every seat was filled. Students, teachers, parents, and even people from the community had come to watch. The air buzzed with excitement and chatter. Backstage, performers were warming up, adjusting their costumes and whispering nervously to each other. He stood alone in a corner, away from everyone else. He was wearing the only dress shirt he owned, a white button-down that his mother had ironed that morning. It was slightly too big for him, and the collar was frayed at the edges, but it was clean and it was his. His hands were trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of everything that was about to happen. 10 years of his life had led to this moment. 10 years of secret practice, of stolen hours on borrowed pianos, of dreaming about something bigger than the world he was born into. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He thought about his mother. He thought about the way she smiled at him that morning and told him she was proud of him no matter what happened. He thought about every late night, every sore finger, every time he wanted to quit but did not. He was ready. The talent show began. One by one, students took the stage. A girl sang a pop song. A group of boys performed a comedy skit. Someone did a magic trick that did not quite work. The audience clapped politely after each act, waiting for the next one. Then, halfway through the show, the host walked to the microphone and read the next name on the list. His name. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He could hear people whispering, some of them already laughing. Word had spread about the kid who signed up to play piano without ever having a lesson. They had come to watch him fail. He stepped out from behind the curtain and walked toward the stage. The lights were blinding. The auditorium seemed enormous, like an ocean of faces stretching out into the darkness. His legs felt heavy, but he kept moving forward. And then he saw something that made his heart sink. Mr. was sitting at a second piano on the stage. The teacher had a microphone clipped to his jacket and a smug smile on his face. He leaned toward the microphone and addressed the audience. "Ladies and," Mr. said smoothly, "I will be accompanying this student tonight, just in case he needs a little help." The audience laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but a knowing one. They understood what was happening. The music teacher was there to save the show when the untrained boy inevitably stumbled. He felt the heat rise to his face. His hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, he thought about turning around and walking off the stage. This was a setup, a public execution disguised as a performance. But then he looked out into the audience, and in the very back row he saw her. His mother. She had come. She must have taken the night off work, something she never did because they needed every dollar. She was sitting in the last row, wearing her old coat, her hands folded in her lap, and even from that distance he could see the look on her face. She believed in him. She had always believed in him. He turned away from Mister and walked to the grand piano at the center of the stage. He sat down on the bench and adjusted his position. The auditorium fell silent. Hundreds of eyes watched him. Hundreds of people waited for him to fail. He placed his fingers on the keys. For one long moment he did not move. He let the silence stretch out, let the tension build. He could feel his heartbeat in his chest, steady and strong. He thought about the first time he ever touched a piano, that night in the empty practice room when he was just 7 years old. He thought about how far he had come since then. Then he began to play. The first notes rang out into the auditorium like a whisper, soft, gentle, almost fragile. The piece started slowly, a simple melody that floated through the air and settled over the audience like a blanket. A few people shifted in their seats. This was not what they expected. There were no mistakes, no hesitation, just pure, clean music. Then the piece began to build. The melody grew stronger. The rhythm became more complex. His fingers moved across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. Notes cascaded like waterfalls. Harmonies layered on top of each other, creating something rich and deep and beautiful. The smirks in the audience faded. The whispers stopped. People leaned forward in their seats, their mouths slightly open, their eyes wide. Mister sat frozen at his piano. His hands rested on his knees. He had not played a single note. His confident expression had crumbled into something else. Confusion, disbelief, and slowly, unmistakably, shame. The music filled every corner of the auditorium. It poured out of the piano and wrapped around everyone in the room. It was angry and tender. It was fierce and fragile. It told a story without words, a story of struggle and loneliness and hope and triumph. He played like he had never played before. Every emotion he had ever felt, every hardship he had ever faced, every dream he had ever held onto in the dark, it all came pouring out through his fingers. He was not just playing a piece of music. He was playing his entire life. The final section of the piece arrived like a storm. His hands flew across the keys in a blur. The notes came faster and faster, building toward an impossible climax. The audience held their breath. No one moved. No one made a sound. And then with one final thundering chord, it was over. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. He sat at the piano, his chest heaving, his fingers still resting on the keys. Sweat dripped down the side of his face. He did not look up. He did not move. For a moment he thought he had failed. The silence was so heavy, so complete, that he was sure something had gone wrong. Then someone in the front row stood up. Then another person, and another. And suddenly, the entire auditorium erupted. The applause was deafening. It crashed over him like a wave, filling his ears, shaking the floor beneath his feet. People were cheering. People were shouting. People were on their feet, clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. He looked up, his vision blurry with tears he did not even realize were falling. He saw faces he did not recognize, all of them staring at him with something he had never seen directed at him before. Respect. In the back row, his mother was standing too. Her hands were pressed over her mouth, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. She was smiling, smiling bigger than he had ever seen her smile in his entire life. He had done it. After 10 years of hiding, 10 years of being invisible, 10 years of silent practice in empty rooms, he had finally shown the world who he really was. And the world could not look away. The applause did not stop. It went on and on, rolling through the auditorium like thunder that refused to fade. People were still standing. Some were wiping their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief, turning to the person next to them and asking the same question. Did that really just happen? He sat at the piano, unable to move. His hands were still resting on the keys, trembling slightly from the intensity of what he had just done. His mind had not caught up yet. Part of him still expected to wake up and realize this was all a dream. But it was not a dream. The cheering was real. The tears on his face were real. And the hundreds of people looking at him like he was someone who mattered, that was real too. Slowly he pushed himself up from the bench. His legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. He turned to face the audience and gave a small, awkward bow. He had never bowed to anyone before. He did not know how to accept this kind of attention. For so long, he had been invisible. Now, suddenly, everyone could see him. The applause grew even louder. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement on the stage. Mr. was standing up from the second piano. The teacher's face had changed completely. The smugness was gone. The arrogance had melted away. What remained was something raw and uncomfortable. It was the face of a man who had just been proven wrong in front of everyone he knew. Mr. walked across the stage slowly. Each step seemed heavy, like he was carrying a weight he had not expected. The audience began to quiet down, curious about what would happen next. By the time the teacher reached the center of the stage, the auditorium had fallen into a tense silence. The two of them stood face to face, the proud music teacher and the quiet boy he had tried to humiliate. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mr. did something no one expected. He extended his hand. "I was wrong about you," the teacher said. His voice cracked slightly, and he had to clear his throat before continuing. "I have been teaching music for over 20 years. I have heard hundreds of students play. And what you just did up there was one of the finest performances I have ever witnessed." The words hung in the air. A few gasps rippled through the audience. Students exchanged shocked glances. Teachers leaned forward in their seats, hardly believing what they were seeing. He stared at Mr.'s outstretched hand. A week ago, this same man had mocked him in front of an entire classroom. A week ago, this same man had called him a joke, told him he would embarrass himself, made him feel like nothing. And now here he was, offering an apology in front of the whole school. He could have refused. He could have left the teacher standing there with his hand hanging in the air. After everything that had happened, no one would have blamed him. But that was not who he was. He reached out and shook Mr.'s hand firmly. The audience erupted again, this time with a different kind of energy. It was not just applause anymore. It was relief. It was admiration. It was the sound of people witnessing something they would never forget. Mr. leaned closer and spoke quietly, so only the two of them could hear. "Where did you learn to play like that?" He thought about the question for a moment. Then he answered honestly. "Everywhere I could," he said, "and nowhere you would expect." The teacher nodded slowly, a new kind of respect in his eyes. Then he stepped back and joined the audience in their applause, clapping along with everyone else. The rest of the talent show continued, but it felt like a formality. Other students performed their acts, and the audience clapped politely, but everyone knew the night had already reached its peak. Nothing else could come close to what had happened on that stage. When the last performer finished, the host returned to the microphone. It was time to announce the winner of the scholarship. "Ladies and," the host began, "our judges have made their decision. This year's talent show winner and the recipient of the $5,000 scholarship is..." The pause felt like it lasted forever. His heart pounded in his chest. He told himself it did not matter. He told himself that just performing was enough, that proving everyone wrong was enough, that hearing those cheers was enough. But deep down, he wanted this. He wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything. Our incredible pianist. The auditorium exploded one more time. People jumped to their feet again. The cheering was so loud it seemed to shake the walls. Someone handed him a small trophy and an envelope with the scholarship check inside. He held them both in his hands, staring at them like they might disappear if he blinked. $5,000. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. It was enough to help with college applications. It was enough to buy his mother something nice for once. It was enough to prove that all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. But the trophy and the money were not the real prize. The real prize was what happened next. As the crowd began to file out of the auditorium, he made his way toward the back row. His mother was still standing there, waiting for him. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was smiling so wide it looked like her face might break. He walked up to her and stopped. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then she pulled him into a hug so tight he could barely breathe. "I am so proud of you," she whispered into his ear. "I have always been proud of you, but tonight you showed everyone what I have known all along." He held on to her and let the tears come. He was not embarrassed. He was not ashamed. These were not the tears of a boy who had been beaten down. These were the tears of someone who had finally, after all these years, been seen. They stood there for a long time, holding each other while the auditorium emptied around them. Students walked past and looked at them. Some nodded with respect. A few even stopped to say congratulations. The same people who had laughed at him in the hallways were now looking at him differently. Everything had changed in a single night. When they finally let go of each other, his mother reached up and wiped the tears from his face. She looked at him with so much love it almost hurt. "You know," she said softly, "I used to feel so guilty, bringing you to that academy every night, making you sit in supply closets and wait for hours while I cleaned. I thought I was giving you a hard life." She paused and shook her head, a small laugh escaping her lips. "But you turned it into something beautiful. You took what we had, which was almost nothing, and you made it into this." He looked at the trophy in his hand, then back at his mother. "I could not have done it without you," he said. "You gave me the chance. You let me play those pianos. You believed in me when no one else did. This is yours as much as it is mine." She smiled and squeezed his hand. "No," she said gently. "This is all you. I just cleaned the rooms. You made the music." They walked out of the auditorium together, side by side. The night air was cool and fresh. The stars were out, scattered across the sky like tiny pieces of hope. He did not know what the future held. He did not know if this moment would lead to bigger things or if life would go back to being hard and ordinary. But right now, in this moment, none of that mattered. He had done something impossible. He had risen from nothing and shown the world what he was made of. And no matter what happened next, no one could ever take that away from him. As they walked toward the bus stop, his mother looked over at him and smiled. "So," she said, "what are you going to play next?" He thought about it for a moment, then he smiled back. "Something even harder," he said. And he meant it. He woke up the next morning thinking life would go back to normal. He was wrong. Someone in the audience had recorded his entire performance on their phone. By the time he got to school that Friday, the video had already been shared hundreds of times. By Saturday afternoon, it had thousands of views. By Sunday night, it had crossed 1 million. The comments poured in from everywhere. People from different cities, different countries, different corners of the world were watching the quiet kid from the back row sit down at a piano and do something impossible. They shared it with their friends. They tagged musicians and teachers and artists. They wrote things like "This gave me chills," and "I cried watching this," and "How is this real?" His phone would not stop buzzing. Messages from people he had not spoken to in years. friend requests from strangers, notifications popping up faster than he could read them. It was overwhelming. He did not know how to handle any of it. But the biggest surprises were still coming. On Monday morning, he was called to the principal's office. When he walked in, the principal was sitting behind her desk with a strange look on her face. It was not a bad look. It was the look of someone who had news they could barely believe themselves. "Sit down," she said. "You are going to want to hear this." She told him that over the weekend, the school had received phone calls from 3 of the top music conservatories in the country. They had seen the video. They wanted to know who he was, and they wanted to offer him a full scholarship. He sat there in silence, unable to process what he was hearing. A full scholarship to schools he had only ever read about online, schools where the greatest pianists in the world had trained, schools that cost more money than his family would ever have. "There is more," the principal continued. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. "This came in this morning." It was an email printed out. He read it slowly, his hands trembling. The email was from one of the most prestigious music academies in the entire world. They had seen the video too, and they were inviting him to audition for their program, all expenses paid. He read the email 3 times before the words finally sank in. This was real. This was actually happening. The weeks that followed were a blur. Interviews with local news stations, features in online magazines, emails from musicians who wanted to meet him. His story spread far beyond the walls of Lincoln High School. He became known as the kid who taught himself piano in secret, the janitor's son who shocked the world. But through all of it, he never forgot where he came from. When the time came to make a decision about his future, he chose carefully. He accepted a full scholarship to one of the conservatories, the one that felt right in his gut. It was across the country, far from the neighborhood where he grew up, far from the cracked streets and the old buildings, and the apartment that always smelled like cleaning supplies. But before he left, he made a promise to himself. He used part of his scholarship money, along with donations that had started coming in from people who saw his video, to start something new. A free music program for kids in his old neighborhood, a place where children who could not afford lessons could come and learn to play, a place where dreams did not have to stay hidden. He found a small community center willing to donate space. He bought a few used keyboards and some beginner books. He put up flyers around the neighborhood, handwritten and simple. Free piano lessons, all ages welcome, no experience needed. The first week, only 3 kids showed up. They were shy and nervous, just like he had been at their age. They sat down at the keyboards and looked at the keys like they were staring at something from another planet. He smiled and sat down next to them. "Let me show you something," he said, and he played a few simple notes, a melody so easy that anyone could learn it in 5 minutes. The kids watched with wide eyes. Then slowly they tried it themselves. That was how it started. Word spread quickly. More kids came the next week. Then more the week after that. Parents who worked double shifts dropped off their children on their way to work, grateful that someone was giving their kids a chance they never had. And there was one more surprise. Mr. showed up one afternoon unannounced. He stood in the doorway of the community center, watching the kids practice their scales. When the lesson ended and the children filed out, the teacher walked over. "I heard about what you are doing here," Mr. said. His voice was different now, softer, humbler. "I wanted to see it for myself." There was a long pause. The 2 of them stood in the empty room, surrounded by old keyboards and folding chairs. "I was not a good teacher to you," Mr. continued. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I made assumptions based on things that did not matter, and I was wrong." He listened without interrupting. He had already forgiven the man a long time ago. Holding on to anger was too heavy. He had learned that the hard way. "I want to help," Mr. said. If you will let me, I can volunteer here, teach some of the older students, share what I know." He thought about it for a moment, then he nodded. "The kids could use a real teacher," he said, "someone with formal training." Mr. smiled just a little, "and someone who learned the hard way that formal training is not everything." From that day on, the program grew. More volunteers joined. More instruments were donated. The small community center became a place of hope for dozens of families who had never had access to music education before. Years passed. He finished his studies at the conservatory. He performed in recital halls and concert venues. He played for audiences who paid hundreds of dollars for tickets. His name appeared in programs and reviews and articles. But the moment that mattered most came on a cool evening in October, 7 years after that talent show in the Lincoln High School auditorium. He was standing backstage at Carnegie Hall. Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert venue in the world, the place where legends had performed for over a century. And tonight, he was the one walking onto that stage. His mother was in the audience, front row this time, not the back. She was wearing a new dress, the first new dress she had owned in years. Her hands were folded in her lap just like they had been on that night so long ago. But this time she was not hiding. She was not sneaking in after work. She was there as a guest of honor. He walked onto the stage and the applause began. Thousands of people filling every seat, every balcony, every corner of the grand hall. He made his way to the piano, the most beautiful instrument he had ever seen, and sat down on the bench. Before he played, he leaned into the microphone and spoke. "I want to dedicate tonight's performance to my mother," he said. His voice was steady, but his heart was full. "She cleaned pianos by day so I could play them by night. Everything I am, everything I have become started with her. This is for you, Mom." In the front row, his mother pressed her hand to her heart. Tears were already falling down her face. He turned to the piano, placed his fingers on the keys, and began to play. The music filled Carnegie Hall, rising up to the highest balconies, wrapping around every person in the room. It was the same passion, the same fire, the same love that had poured out of him in that high school auditorium all those years ago. But now the whole world was listening. Some talents cannot be taught in classrooms. Some dreams refuse to stay hidden. And some stories, the ones born from struggle and sacrifice and love, are the ones that stay with us forever. This was one of those stories. And it was only the beginning.